I found a lost journal tucked inside a library book. It was filled with beautiful, heartbreaking entries about the author's secret crush on a handsome stranger she saw every day at a cafe. As a hopeless romantic, I made it my mission to find this man and bring them together. I just had no idea that the love story I was about to orchestrate was my own. Before we open that journal, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from today? And be sure to subscribe for our daily stories. Okay, let's head to that library. My life was a collection of other people's stories. I was a librarian at the city's old, beautiful, quiet central branch. I spent my days surrounded by the greatest love stories ever told, by tales of epic adventure and profound heartbreak. My job was to categorize them, to shelve them, to preserve them. I was a curator of emotions I had never been brave enough to experience for myself. I was a hopeless romantic, a woman who believed in soulmates and in the quiet, cosmic machinery of fate. But I was also painfully and cripplingly shy. My own life was a book I was too afraid to write, its pages a blank, lonely expanse. The day my own story began was a Tuesday, a day of a soft, persistent, and deeply romantic autumn rain. I was at my desk in the back room, processing a cart of returned books. It was in an old, well-loved copy of Wuthering Heights that I found it. Tucked between the pages, like a pressed flower, was a small, beautiful, and clearly very treasured, leather-bound journal. My first professional instinct was to simply log it into the Lost and Found, a piece of forgotten property to be filed away. But I hesitated. The journal was too beautiful, too personal, to be treated so impersonally. It was a deep forest green, the leather soft and worn, and it was tied shut with a simple, elegant black ribbon. My curiosity, a thing I usually kept under a librarian's strict control, got the better of me. I untied the ribbon, and I opened it. The handwriting inside was a beautiful, passionate, and slightly chaotic script, and the words were a punch to my own lonely romantic heart. It was a diary, yes, but it was also a love letter, a series of unsent, personal love letters to a stranger. October 14th, the first entry I read began. He was here again today, at the Daily Grind Cafe. He always sits at the same table, the small one by the window. He was reading a book of poetry, and the way the afternoon light caught in his dark hair, I think my own heart stopped for a moment. He has the kindest eyes I have ever seen. I wonder what his name is. I kept reading, completely and utterly captivated. Page after page was filled with these small, beautiful, and heartbreaking observations of a man she had never spoken to. She wrote about the books he read, about the sad, thoughtful way he would look out at the rain, about a kindness she had witnessed when he had helped an elderly woman who had dropped her purse. This woman, this anonymous and familiar stranger, she was a kindred spirit. She was another quiet observer, another woman who was living a grand and beautiful love story entirely inside her own heart. I held the stranger's diary in my hands, her secret, unrequited love, a beautiful, painful, relatable story. I could have just put it in the Lost and Found box, as my job required. I could have just closed the cover and forgotten about it. But I couldn't. This woman, whoever she was, she deserved her happy ending. She deserved her chance to meet the man with the kind eyes. And I, the quiet, lonely librarian who had only ever read about grand romantic gestures, decided, in that moment, to do something utterly reckless, something deeply, wonderfully, and beautifully uncharacteristic. I was not just going to file this story away. I was going to try and give it an ending. I was going to become a matchmaker. My first act as a self-appointed matchmaker was to become a detective. I took the journal home with me that night, an act that was a small but thrilling violation of library policy. I sat in my own quiet apartment and I read it from cover to cover, not as a romantic, but as an analyst. I was searching for clues. The author, a woman whose name I did not know, was a brilliant, romantic observer. She had chronicled every detail of the man in the cafe. He read poetry, mostly Keats and Shelley. He had a small, faded tattoo of what looked like an anchor on his left wrist. He always ordered the same thing, a large black coffee and a blueberry scone. And he was always there between the hours of 3 and 5 in the afternoon, at a small corner cafe called The Daily Grind. I had my location, I had my time frame, and I had my target. The next afternoon, I did something I had not done in years. I left the library for my lunch break. I walked the 6 blocks to the Daily Grind, my heart a frantic, nervous drum in my chest. The cafe was exactly as the journal had described it, a warm, cozy, intellectual space with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and the rich, comforting scent of old books and fresh ground coffee. It was the kind of place I had always dreamed of frequenting, but had always been too shy to enter alone. I sat at a small table, nursing a single cup of tea, and I watched. I felt like a spy, a private investigator on a case of the utmost and most secret importance. I scanned the faces of every man who entered, comparing them to the vague, romantic description in the journal, but he was not there. I stayed for 2 hours, my initial thrilling sense of purpose slowly being replaced by a new, familiar feeling of foolishness. What was I doing? I was a librarian, not a private detective. This was a ridiculous, childish fantasy. I was about to give up, to return the journal to the lost and found box, and to retreat back into the safe, predictable, lonely world of my own life. But that night, I read the journal one last time, and I found a passage I had missed before. "He was not here today," the author had written, "and the cafe felt a little less bright without him, but I am not discouraged. A love story, a real one, is not about the grand cinematic gestures. It is about the quiet, patient, and deeply hopeful act of simply showing up, day after day, and waiting for the magic to happen." Her words, her quiet, unwavering faith in the power of patience, were a gentle, necessary rebuke to my own cowardice. She was not a quitter, and I, her secret and only agent in this mission, would not be one either. I decided to try again, but I knew I needed a new strategy. I needed more information. The man was a ghost, but the woman who had written about him, she was real, and if I could find her, I knew she could lead me to him. I went back to the journal, but this time I was not looking for clues about the man. I was looking for clues about the author. I searched for a name, an address, a phone number. There was nothing. And then, just as I was about to give up, my fingers found a small, hidden, and almost invisible pocket in the back leather cover of the journal. Inside was a single, small, and very faded piece of paper. It was a receipt from a small and very obscure second-hand bookstore on the other side of town, a place that specialized in rare, first-edition poetry. The receipt was for a used copy of the complete works of John Keats, and it was dated just 3 weeks ago. It was a long shot, a tiny, fragile, and almost certainly hopeless clue, but it was the only one I had. My mission wasn't over. The hunt for the handsome, mysterious stranger had just, in a strange and wonderful and literary twist, become a hunt for the mysterious author herself. And I had a strange and hopeful feeling that finding one would be the only and the truest way to find the other. The small, faded receipt was a flimsy, almost insignificant clue, but for me, a woman who had spent her entire life navigating the quiet, orderly world of the Dewey Decimal System, it was a breadcrumb trail I could not ignore. The hunt for the handsome stranger had stalled, but the hunt for the mysterious author of the journal, The woman with the beautiful, romantic soul had just begun. The bookstore was on the other side of town, a part of the city I rarely visited. It was a small, magical, chaotic place, a wonderful fire hazard of towering, crooked stacks of used books that smelled of old paper and dust and time. An elderly man with a wild mane of white hair and glasses perched on the end of his nose sat behind a counter that was itself a fortress of books. He looked up as I entered, a look of quiet, scholarly curiosity in his eyes. I was terrified. My mission, which had felt so noble in the quiet solitude of my own apartment, now felt deeply and profoundly foolish. I was a spy in the house of love, and I was a terrible one. But I thought of the woman, of her beautiful, hopeful words, and I found a small, fragile piece of courage. I walked to the counter. "Excuse me," I began, my voice a quiet, nervous whisper. "I know this is a very strange question." I placed the journal and the small faded receipt on the counter between us. "I found this journal at the library where I work, and this receipt was tucked inside. I'm trying to find its owner." The old bookseller looked at the receipt, then at the beautiful green leather journal. He picked it up, his hands gentle and reverent. "This is a lovely binding," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He did not open it. "A person who owns a journal like this is a person who values the weight of words." He then looked back at the receipt. "Ah, yes," he said, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Keats, a first edition folio. I remember this sale." My heart gave a small, hopeful leap. "You do? You remember who bought it?" "Oh, yes," he said with a small smile, "but I am afraid you have your story a little mixed up, my dear." "What do you mean?" I asked. "The person who bought this book," he said, tapping the receipt, "was not a woman. It was a young man, a regular of mine, a good kid, a writer, I think, always in here buying old poetry books. He's the one who bought the Keats." He then looked at the journal. He told me he was giving it to a friend, a woman, a friend who he was trying, I think, to impress. The pieces of the puzzle in my own mind shifted, rearranging themselves into a new and far more complicated picture. The author of the journal was not a secret admirer from afar. She knew the man, and he, the man with the kind eyes, was not a stranger to her. He was a friend who bought her beautiful first edition books of poetry. This was not a story of a secret crush. This was a story of a deep and perhaps tragically unrequited love. Do you know his name?" I whispered, my own heart now aching with a new and far more profound sense of the stakes. "Of course," the old bookseller said with a warm smile. "A good kid like that, you remember his name. It's Daniel Peterson." I walked back to the Daily Grind cafe, the green leather journal in my bag now feeling heavier, more important, and infinitely sadder than it had before. This was not a simple romantic mission to connect two lonely strangers anymore. This was something far more delicate and far more dangerous. I finally had a name for the handsome stranger, Daniel, and now I had to find out if the kind, poetry-loving man had any idea that the woman he saw as just a friend was secretly and completely, and perhaps hopelessly, in love with him. I entered the cafe, my heart a frantic, nervous drum in my chest, and this time he was there. He was sitting at the small corner table by the window, exactly as the journal had described. A stack of old, well-loved books was on the table beside him, and he was staring out at the rain-streaked street, a look of a quiet, thoughtful sadness on his handsome face. He was, in a word, perfect, a character from a book brought to life. For a full 5 minutes, I just stood by the door, a coward, unable to move. "Go home, Helena," the familiar, frightened voice in my head whispered. "This is not your story. This is not your business."
But then I thought of the woman who had written the journal, of her quiet, patient hope, and I knew I couldn't. I had to see this through, for her. With a deep, steadying breath, I began the long, terrifying walk across the cafe floor. I stopped at his table. He looked up from his thoughts, and his eyes, the kind, intelligent eyes the journal had so lovingly described, met mine. "Excuse me," I began, my own voice a small, trembling thing. Are you Daniel?" He looked surprised, but a slow, warm smile spread across his face. "I am," he said. "Can I help you?" And then the story, the entire strange, embarrassing story, just tumbled out of me in a frantic, rambling rush. I told him I was a librarian. I told him I had found a journal left in a book. I told him I had read it, which I knew was a terrible invasion of privacy, but that it had been so beautiful, so heartfelt. I told him it was about him. And then, with a hand that was shaking so badly I could barely control it, I held out the green leather journal to him. I thought the person who wrote this, I concluded, my own face now burning with a deep and profound humiliation, would want you to have it. He just stared at me, his own face a mask of pure, unadulterated, bewildered confusion. He took the journal from me as if it were a strange, alien object. He untied the ribbon. He opened it. I watched, my own heart in my throat, as he read. I watched as he scanned the pages, his brow furrowed in a deep, confusing concentration. I was expecting a flash of recognition, a sad, knowing smile, a look of a dawning, heartbroken understanding. Instead, after a long, silent moment, he looked up from the journal and he began to laugh. It was not a cruel laugh. It was a gentle, kind, and utterly, completely, and totally confused laugh. I am so sorry," he said, shaking his head, a look of a genuine and very charming bafflement on his face. This is beautifully written. The woman who wrote this is a true romantic, but," he looked back at the journal and then at me, "I have absolutely no idea who she is."
My own world seemed to stop. "What?" I whispered. "I mean it," he said. "I don't know anyone who would describe me this way. The man in this book," he said, tapping the page, "is not a real person. He is a character, a beautiful, romantic, and fictional character. I think," he said, his eyes now full of a gentle, apologetic pity for me, "that you have been on a quest to find a man who doesn't actually exist." The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, burning wave that washed over me from my toes to the roots of my hair. My grand, romantic, and foolish mission had been a complete and total failure. I had not been a matchmaker. I had been a fool. "Oh my God," I stammered, my own face now the color of a ripe tomato. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry to have bothered you." I began to back away from the table, my only thought to flee the scene of my own epic and self-inflicted social death. I'll go now." "Wait," he said, his voice a sudden, sharp, and surprisingly firm command. "Please, don't go." He looked at the journal and then back at me, and a new and wonderfully intrigued smile was on his face. "You know," he said, his own kind eyes now twinkling with a genuine amusement, "I may not be the romantic, poetry-reading soulmate that this woman wrote about, but I am," he continued, his smile widening, "deeply and completely charmed by the woman who was romantic enough to believe that he was real and to try and find him." He then gestured to the empty chair opposite him. Can I buy you a cup of coffee, Miss Librarian?" I had come to this cafe on a mission to start someone else's love story. I had failed in the most spectacular and profoundly humiliating way possible.
But as I looked at the kind, handsome, and very real stranger who was now asking me to stay, I had the strange and wonderfully hopeful feeling that I had just, by complete and total and beautiful accident, stumbled into the very first chapter of my own. "Yes," I said, my voice a small, shaky but definite thing. "I would like that very much." The hour that followed was the most surreal and the most wonderful of my entire adult life. The initial excruciating awkwardness of the situation slowly began to melt away, replaced by a new, surprising sense of comfort. He was easy to talk to. His name was Daniel, and he was not the tortured, silent poet from the journal. He was a writer. Yes, but he was a history writer, a man with a quick, dry wit and a laugh that was a warm, genuine, and infectious sound. He was, I discovered, just as shy and just as much of a hopeless romantic as I was. "So," he had said after we had been talking for a while, a look of genuine, amused curiosity in his kind eyes, "you really spent a week of your life, on your own time, trying to track down a complete stranger just to return a lost journal and maybe, possibly, create a love story?" "It sounds very foolish when you say it like that," I admitted, my own cheeks flushing with the fresh wave of embarrassment. "No," he said, his voice now soft and very sincere thing. "It doesn't sound foolish at all. It sounds wonderful. It sounds like something out of one of the old books I love to read. It's the most romantic thing I have ever heard." We talked about the journal, the green leather-bound elephant in the room that was sitting on the table between us. We decided that its author was most likely a creative writing student, and that the man she had described was a fictional composite, an idealized version of a dozen different men she had seen in that very cafe. Her story, we concluded, had served its purpose. It had been written, and now it had been read. I decided then and there that I would simply, and anonymously, return it to the library's lost and found, its strange, magical, and deeply personal mission now complete. As the afternoon sun began to fade and the cafe began to fill up with the after-work crowd, we knew our own strange and wonderful first date was coming to an end. He walked me to the door. "I have a confession to make," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper as we stood by the door. "I'm not quite the stranger that the journal made me out to be." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I've seen you before," he admitted, a shy, handsome smile on his face. "In here, a few times. You were always sitting by yourself, reading a book. The quiet, beautiful librarian. I tried to work up the courage to talk to you a few times, but," he gave a small, self-deprecating shrug, "I'm not as brave as the man in the journal." I walked home from that small, warm coffee shop, my own heart a light and buoyant and impossibly, wonderfully happy thing. The city, which had so often felt like a vast and lonely landscape, now seemed full of a secret and beautiful magic. The journal, the mystery, the grand romantic quest I had embarked upon, it had all been a beautiful and total and utterly magnificent failure, and it was, without a single, solitary doubt, the greatest failure of my entire life, because it had led me here. It had led me to him, and a new story, a real story, my story was just about to begin. Our first date, a few nights later, was not a grand cinematic affair. It was a quiet, simple, perfect dinner at a small neighborhood Italian restaurant. We talked for hours. We talked about books and about our families and about our own quiet and very similar dreams for the future. He was not the fantasy poet from the journal. He was better. He was real, a kind and funny, wonderfully real man. And I, the quiet, shy librarian, I was not the bold, romantic detective I had been pretending to be. I was just myself, and it was the first time, in a very long time, that I had felt like that was more than enough. The months that followed were a quiet and beautiful unfolding of a love story that was better than any I had ever read in a book. Our shared shyness was not a barrier, it was a common language. We understood each other's silences, each other's hesitations. He would leave old, well-loved books of poetry on my doorstep. I would leave him notes tucked into the library books I knew he was about to check out. Our romance was a quiet, literary, personal thing, a story written just for us. The green leather journal, the strange, magical catalyst for our entire relationship, sat on my bookshelf, a quiet and cherished memento of the strange day our story had begun. It was about 6 months later, on a lazy Sunday afternoon in my apartment, that we discovered its final and most profound secret. I had taken it down from the shelf, and we were laughing, once again, at the strange, romantic, foolish quest it had sent me on. "Her handwriting was so beautiful," I said, tracing the elegant, looping script with my finger. Daniel leaned in closer, a new and strangely analytical look on his face. "It is beautiful, but are you sure it's a her?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "Look at the way the T's are crossed, and the pressure on the downstrokes. It's a very strong, very deliberate script. It's not a woman's handwriting, Helena. I'm almost certain it's a man's."
We stared at the page, and suddenly we saw it. We began to read it again, but with new eyes. We saw not the story of a shy woman, but of a man who was secretly in love with another man, the handsome stranger in the cafe. The journal was not just a story of an unrequited crush. It was the secret, heartbreaking love story of a man, likely from a much older and far less accepting generation, who had used the safety of a fictional female persona to pour out the truth of a love he could never, ever speak aloud. The final, beautiful, poignant irony of the situation settled over us. This secret, hidden, and ultimately sad love story, a story that had likely never had a happy ending of its own, had, through a strange and beautiful and mysterious twist of fate, become the accidental and unwitting catalyst for our own. We knew in that moment what we had to do. The journal did not belong in the lost and found, and it did not belong to us. It belonged to the world. The story ends not in the cafe, but in the quiet, sacred silence of my own library. I am at my desk, and with the careful, professional, and loving hands of a librarian, I am cataloging a new and very special acquisition. I give it a title, The Anonymous Admirer, a journal. I list the author as anonymous, and under the genre, I type the one, single, and most truthful word I can think of: love story. Daniel stands beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder, and together we walk into the quiet, dusty stacks, and I slide the small, green, leather-bound journal onto a shelf in its proper and final resting place, right between a collection of Keats and a volume of Shelley. The man who had written it, the man with the beautiful and broken and courageous heart, had never gotten his own happy ending. But his story, his beautiful and sad, honest story, had reached out across time, and it had found two other quiet and lonely romantic souls, and it had, against all odds, written a brand new and very, very happy ending for them. An absolutely beautiful and unique love story, born from another love story that was lost to time. What a perfect, serendipitous ending. This story is all about the magic of a chance encounter. Have you ever had a small, random moment that ended up changing your life? Let us know in the comments below. If this heartwarming story made you smile, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more feel-good and emotional stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.